It is an old man's car. It is slow.
I thought, I want one of those. That's it. I just want one.
When you have the bug, there is no cure.
Rather like caviar to other fish. It's exclusive.
May fetch £400,000 or so.
And it's a world beater. Walter Owen Bentley was born in 1888, the son of quite rich people in London. Unusually for a family of that sort of class, he actually became a premium apprentice at the Great Northern Locomotive Works at Doncaster. From that rather unusual beginning, he involved himself in motor cars pre-First World War. W.O. Bentley and his brother, H.M., imported 3 French cars, in fact, 3 different types. DFP was the most significant and the most tunable of them all. And it was there that W.O. Bentley cut his teeth.
This car is experimental number 2. In 1919, in the winter, W.O. Bentley decided to time he manufactured cars. And they built experimental 1, experimental number 2, and experimental number 3. Number 1 was scrapped, so here we are, we're left with the oldest Bentley, which is something to be quite proud of. It was the first Bentley to ever win a race. During its racing life, which was from 1921 to 1923, he actually won 12 races. This included hill climbs as well as sprints and round Brooklands at something like 85, 90 miles per hour, which in those days was quite good, really. You will notice on this one too that the registration number is BM, Bentley Motors, and they went to Bedfordshire especially to get these numbers on the 1, 2 and 3 cars.
Experimental number 2 was exhibited at the 1919 Motor Show and created quite a sensation, although it took them another 2 years to actually get a production car off the line, as it were. Putting this whole thing in the social context, there was plenty of money about, and people sickened by the experience of the First World War wanted to have a bit of fun. They wanted to break away from the fusty and now outdated and rather tortured Edwardian period. In the very early days, it was principally a young man's car who wanted a sports car. You had to be rich. I mean, a chassis was £1,000. You could have bought 3 houses for that.
I came upon experimental number 2 quite by accident. I used to run the spare scheme for the Bentley Drivers Club and visit all the main restorers. And one in particular was a chap called Tony Townsend, who had had experimental number 2 for a number of years, and eventually blew it up and then decided to take it apart. I took the car on when I bought the business as part of the deal. We've taken 10 years to put it back into its state it's in at the moment. We've had to rebuild the body completely. We've made all new wings, running boards, but most of the other bits were around and have just been restored as normal. A 3-litre engine is a 4-stroke engine. It's 4 cylinders, overhead cam, with twin magnetos and twin carburetors, with a dynamo driven off the back of the camshaft to give a bit of stability as far as knocks are concerned. I started off with motorbikes. I next went to Morris 8, then to an Alvis 1250, which I used for a long, long time. And then I bought Bentleys. And then there was no looking back, and it's been Bentley, Bentley, Bentley from there on. I've raced Bentleys for 30 or 40 years now, on and off. And that gave me an enormous amount of pleasure. And eventually, I'm afraid, arthritis caught up with me. Can't drive experimental number 2 at the moment. I've got a total knee replacement. This is the 5th total knee replacement. Hopefully this one will be a success, or else I should be on peg legs, which I hope we won't be the case. And we're keeping our fingers crossed. And maybe next year might be back to normal again.
Bentleys became fashionable probably from the mid-20s onwards. Fashionable enough for W.O. Bentley to want to design and develop a larger Bentley, the 6.5 litre Bentley. And that was his luxury. That was the carriage trade side of the business, if you like.
This is a 1928 6.5 litre saloon. Bentley called it the Big Bentley. Of the 350 or so built, there are only 79 known to be in existence. And we are very proud of this one because it is a 5th owner car, which in modern car terms is an old car. But in Bentley terms it is unique. All known owners, and it is totally original. The paintwork is original, the interior, the engine. Driving the car, it is an old man's car. It is slow. That's perhaps why it was a car with a division. Old man in the back, chauffeur in the front.
People would leave their country residence, would be ushered down the steps and would enter a kind of, well, it was a mobile saloon bar. Maybe a dictograph or a dictaphone and a speaking tube to communicate your wishes to James up front. So the body was like building a house. You fitted it out just as you wanted. If you had the money, you could have what you like.
When you tell people that this engine has an overhead camshaft, has 4 valves per cylinder, that the car has servo brakes, they look in disbelief. Because today they try and sell a new car with 4 valves per cylinder, as it was invented yesterday.
Bentley in the 1920s were a marketing failure. In order to be successful, they'd got to market their cars in the same way that Rolls-Royce and Daimler did, to appeal to the chauffeur-driven luxury brigade as well as to the people interested in their racing successors. And when you look at the various body styles in 1920s brochures, you get the speed models at the beginning looking very attractive, and then the closed coupes and the launderlettes are rather ugly and ill-formed, and you can't imagine anyone buying them in preference to a Rolls-Royce or a Daimler.
In 1938, I think it was the Glasses Guide then, who didn't even put a price on a second-hand model because they were only good for breaking up. And a famous car called the Blue Train, which today is priceless, was sold for £20. So in those days, the cost of repairing the Bentley were in excess of the value. Today it is the other way around. I wouldn't like to quote a price on this type of car, but we talk 6 figures. I have 3 sons, and together with my wife we ran quite a sizable business. And one of my sons, we call him son number 2, one day came home in a Bentley, and I asked him what he paid for it. He told me, and I really went bananas. And look where we are today. In the last 5 years, we, I think, bought on average 2 a year. It is almost like a contagious disease. When you have the bug, there is no cure. I enjoyed driving the car. And that says it all. Just the enjoyment of owning the car and driving it and sharing it.
The 6.5 litre Bentley was one part of the strategy of Bentley Motors. The sporting image was always there. The Bentley boys were a group of rich men in the main who bought Bentleys privately and then decided to race them. And they were daring, courageous, high-spirited people, lots of jokes played on each other. They were a tremendous crowd, and many of these guys had 4, 5 or 6 cars costing £1,200 or £1,500 a piece. You know, their professions range from stockbrokers. Dudley Benjafield was a Harley Street bacteriologist. Wolf Bonato, who inherited a fabulous fortune from the Kimberley diamond mines, came in on the Bentley scene in the mid-20s and realised that here was a company that could realise his ambition of becoming famous motor racing driver, and effectively poured a considerable fortune, something in the region, we think, of £100,000 into the company. The 6.5 litre was not a success to begin with, and it stretched the company virtually to break point. It was only the intervention of Wolf Bonato that saved the company. And it was in the late 20s that W.O. Bentley developed arguably the most glamorous vintage sports car ever conceived, raced, owned by these Bentley boys, the Mayfair Beaumont. W.O. Bentley developed the 4.5 litre Bentley in 1927. The ultimate development of the 4.5 litre was the 4.5 supercharged car, which developed at the request of Sir Henry Birkin, one of the Bentley boys, one of the most famous. He wanted his Bentley to go quicker and quicker. W.O. a bit disapproving. To supercharge a car is to pervert its design and performance, quote.
Bentley was always keen on publicity, and he accepted that if Birkin could get some publicity for this car by this manoeuvre, it was to be tolerated. So, at vast expense, mostly covered by Birkin, they put a supercharger on the car, and Birkin took it to Le Mans and took it to Brooklands and raced it. And he did some very good things, but he produced enormous publicity for Bentley, and it is really, to be honest, that publicity which is carried over to maintain the reputation of the blower. This car is the 1931 supercharged 4.5 litre Bentley. This car is the result of about 8 years' loving effort by a man called George Dodds. For many years there have only been 39 of the 50 cars known to exist, and he found some parts and then spent, to the best of my knowledge, about 8 years scouring the world to get as many of the right original bits together as he could, because all the blower cars have numbers stamped on all the different parts. So if you've got the same numbers, you've got all the same bits from the original car. I think the most idiosyncratic part of the car is probably the dashboard, because George was a very keen Spitfire man. So he's got little bits on the dashboard which actually have come off a Spitfire, for instance, the starter button. I've always had a Bentley. The first car I ever bought was one. And it goes back to when I left university, where I was a dental student. I went to work in a hospital and lived in the mess. And one evening, after the meal, it was very wet and dark, and I was sitting there and I heard this quite delightful sound outside the building, and looking out into the wet and the dark, I saw what had turned out to be a 3 litre Bentley. I thought, I want one of those. That's it, I just want one. worked my way up over 35 years from a rather ordinary 3 litre up to what I think is the toppest of the vintage Bentleys. The lower Bentley is rather like caviar to other fish. It's exclusive, it's exotic, and again it is all to do with image and history and reputation.
The 4.5 litre supercharged car was undoubtedly successful as a racing car. There wasn't much time to develop it, so there were problems. But Sir Henry Birkin developed his own team of racing supercharged 4.5 litres and drove the cars at Le Mans. He drove them in a Grand Prix race in 1930 in France and came second.
As time has gone on, which means as I've got older, younger people no longer frequently stop and look at it. It just goes past them and it doesn't register. But there are still a large number of people over, shall we say, 40, who will stop and even turn round. And in fact, there's one gentleman in my road, who I won't name, who always salutes when I go past. And I think it's lovely of him.
W.O. Bentley undoubtedly wanted to produce, as the ultimate expression of his genius, the 8 litre Bentley. The tooling began in the middle of 1930. The car itself, the first production car, wasn't ready until the very last part of 1930. Already, the world's economies were beginning to melt down in a serious way. And here was this massive, the largest capacity car on the British market at the time. They were guaranteed to do 100 miles an hour with any coachwork. Now, no car, certainly no British car of that time, could match that sort of luxurious performance. So it really was an ultimate. Rolls-Royce were seriously worried by the 8 litre Bentley.
Well, this car was the second car sold of the 8 litre production run, if you can call it that. It was used by W.O. as his own personal transport. I suppose you'd call it today a company car. He objected to anybody else driving it. In fact, on the pain of being sacked, put a notice up in the works saying it was his and that was it. It was tested by the auto car, and they actually had it at over 100 miles an hour. It was the first time they'd done that with a saloon. They didn't really want to publicise this for fear of people thinking, my word, you know, it's spoilt its town carriage image and it's really a sports car. But that's what Bentley wanted, to build people cars which they could use and go fast in. It has a right-hand gear change and a right-hand brake, which made it exceedingly difficult to get in and out of. But once in, you're all right. And the idea when driving these cars, there was so much torque that I rather think you got into top as quickly as possible and kept it there. You don't really need bottom, that's for crawling along or going up some staggeringly steep hill. But it handles very well. It's the same width as all Bentleys, it's the same width, 4 foot 8.5. That's the centre of the wheel track to the centre of the other one. A very good, newly restored 8 litre Bentley may fetch £400,000 or so. This, which has not been restored, it's been repainted once and brought back to the original colours that it is thought to have had. It has the provenance of having belonged to W.O. Bentley and Autocar testing it, and it's one of the 2 vintage ones. That must easily attract double what you get for a rather good 8 litre.
Bentley Motors Limited skated on the brink of insolvency throughout the latter part of 1930. W.O. Bentley himself was very nearly given the sack in September 1930, staggeringly enough. So things were getting very, very bad. In 1931, it became clear that the company could no longer survive. In order to keep the company going, Wolf Bonato would, from his own pocket, purchase chassis in order to pay the wages. Eventually, his advisors said to him, "We can't provide any more cash. This company is going to become insolvent." And it was thought to be a formality that the company would be bought by Napier's of Acton. It didn't quite work out like that. And the British Central Equitable Trust put in a sealed bid and won, and they were representing Rolls-Royce Motors. W.O. Bentley was only 43 years old when Bentley Motors finally hit the buffers. And I think it's a staggering compliment that so young a man had achieved so much in those 12 extraordinary, glorious years.
Rolls-Royce knew what they were doing when they bought Bentley. They bought the silent sports car image. And throughout the 1930s, they continued to market the different character of Bentley. I recollect particularly in a late 30s brochure produced by Jack Barclay, a series of 4 pictures of formal dark Rolls-Royces and light-coloured flamboyant Bentleys, showing very starkly the contrast of the body styles and the presentation of the two marques.
For a time, Rolls-Royce chose to ignore the huge history and potential of the Bentley marque. Much to their credit now, Rolls-Royce Motors and Bentley Motors, the joint company, are producing a fast, high-performance Bentley, a convertible model by the name of the Asia, and it's a world beater.